Okay, welcome to Chapter 5. I'm going to go ahead and split this lecture at least into two parts, with photosynthesis and cellular respiration being the two splits, the two major splits. So I am going to do a full-out lecture. That way you can watch this at your convenience. And I will go ahead, either I'll stop and ask questions, or I'll give you a set of questions that you can answer while you watch the video. Okay, so energy. So we're really going to look at how energy flows through the entire ecosystem, right? Your entire biomes. How does energy transfer from one thing to another? Where does it all start, right? So we're going to look at photosynthesis, that beginning of the energy from the sun, and then that reverse process that is cellular respiration. And we're going to talk about that molecule ATP, which I've mentioned before, adenosine triphosphate, and see what that has to do with any of this. So here I put at the bottom of our objectives, I wanted to make sure we have the textbook definition of energy, and that is the capacity to do work. So I just never liked that definition. I don't know, it's so abstract to me. So I added the little bit more that I came with. And so work is anything that involves moving matter against an opposing force. Okay, so that makes a little bit more sense to me. So, energy is going to be, really, we're going to look at so many different kind of ways that happens, whether it's breaking molecules, whether that's water behind a dam, etc. So energy, the capacity to do work. So the chapter starts out with talking about biofuels. And, there's a lot of good about biofuels. So that's going to be the fuels that we get from things like corn and soybean, even switchgrass. And here it mentions French fry oil. So basically, the oil that's used to cook with, you can actually take that, and because there's all those hydrogen carbon bonds, right, just like oil or coal, anything that has the fossil fuel beginnings, when you have French fry oil that's also from plants, right? When you have fossil fuels, that is basically ancient sunshine. It's that sunshine that has grown plants and some animal matter, and that has been trapped under the earth and pressurized and to create these fossil fuels. Well, here, if we have French fry oil, we're really looking a little bit more directly at the foods, right? Whether it's the oils, the fats and things that you get from animals like beef. I know that some French fry oil, at least back in the day, way back, I believe it was McDonald's that would use like beef tallow or beef fat for their fries. I'm all about not using animal, but man, they were good. Anyway, so there's some ups and downs to using biofuels. And, some of the pros is that we're not deleting all of our fossil fuels, but remember, it does take energy to grow the crop and land and all of those cons, all those things that aren't the best reasons to use biofuels. It takes a lot of energy to grow that. And if you're using fertilizers and pesticides, that's all factored into the con part of using biofuels. So it's an interesting way to jump into this chapter. So really, the bigger picture here is what is the best way to extract, what we need to use for energy to support our human needs without, completely destroying what we're going to need later for our human needs, right? We don't want to destroy ourselves, basically. Well, that got dark fast. So in this chapter, we will talk about the energy conversions of beginning with the sun's rays, like the sun's photons, as it were, and the process that the autotrophs, the self feeders, auto meaning self, what they go through to take that, to be able to utilize the sun's energy to create something that then we can use as part of our energy process, which is cellular respiration. And you know, plants, they respirate as well. So they actually have this whole system within themselves, which is kind of badass, actually. And then when we come to these slides, you know, you can pause here and read over. It's basically summarizing what I just talked about in the previous slides, but I left them in there. So you have these two major divisions of energy, these two forms, kinetic and potential. So kinetic is that energy of motion. So when something's moving, we call it kinetic energy. So you can see in the picture, right? I don't have to describe everything that's happening in the picture. But even included in there would be, you know, when it's being broken down, and that's going to be, you know, kinetic in that form as it's breaking down. And, you know, that's what allows us to do these things, to fly if we're a bird, to ski. But not only does it allow us the energy to do those big things of motion, but it gives it the energy for our body to grow, right? That takes energy as well when we're actually forming more human, right? Especially when you're talking about all those years that we do a lot of growing. Okay, and then potential energy, that basically just means that they're, you know, depending on the position of something, the location, will give us a sense of how much potential energy is there. Or so like, you know, it has here the water behind the dam. Like, you know, if you have that water higher up or more of it, or, you know, depending on how you block that water is really going to dictate how much energy, how much potential energy, like when you let that go, what is going to be the potential to turn it into, you know, kinetic energy, and how much can we harvest from that. So, so we also can look at food that way. Let's go ahead and do that. And the potential, we can see the various amounts of potential energy when we look at food. What are those bonds? So in the last chapter, we talked about macromolecules, you know, the carbohydrates, lipids, and we can look at those, and if we understand the bonds of a particular food, right, whether it's chicken, strawberries, lollipops, I don't know, all of that, we can look at it, and as scientists, we can understand the bonds and understand how much potential energy those bonds have when our body breaks them down and that energy is released. There you go, take home message, summarize. So, keep kind of looking this way because that's where my PowerPoint is. I have two screens here. So if you see me doing this, it's not because I'm like really like, you know, like evading the law or I'm suspicious about something. I'm just looking at the other screen. So, so energy captured and converted. Capturing the energy sent into the sun, you know, the plants do that for us. How do they take that in and change it into something different so it can be utilized as energy for future needs? When you take energy from one form to another, there's always a little bit that's lost, and it's lost in the form of heat. And you can kind of see this like if you have a light bulb, especially the incandescent, the ones that have been around for, you know, for a long, long time, longer than you and I. You're not just getting light from that light bulb, you can feel the heat coming off of that. And that's telling you it's a pretty inefficient light bulb. Unless maybe you have a pet lizard and you want to keep the lizard warm, you really don't turn on light to get heat. So, I'm sorry, my cat is right behind my computer on the table. She knows she's not supposed to be on the table, and she does that because she knows I'm distracted, just like class the other night. So it's, her little tail behind the computer is like so distracting. Anyway, so, but if you were to get closer to a compact fluorescent light bulb, it's going to be a little less heat coming off of that. And if you were to go to an LED light, it's even less. So that tells you it's more efficient in giving you light because it's not giving you as much heat, right? The system used there is converting that energy more efficiently. Now we have this plant we can eat, right? And then we take that plant, and that's converted into the energy that we need inside our bodies. Thermodynamics. So we're studying the transformation of energy. Just like the law of the conservation of matter, we have the first law of thermodynamics, which says energy can't be created from nothing. So it can't be created or destroyed. So it's just changed in form. Second law. So like I was saying, every time you change that energy from one form to another, it doesn't go 100%, efficiency. You're going to lose a lot. And in fact, cars, they're getting better. And sometimes you can hear, I don't know if you heard that really obnoxious vehicle that was outside. They're fairly close to Ogden Avenue, which is a pretty busy street. So anyway, there's cars in general are pretty inefficient machines. And here's where you bring kind of politics into science. You often have particular political parties or politicians wanting to set better regulations or laws in place to make cars more efficient. So when we take that fossil fuel and we're using it to fuel a car or a vehicle, we're using it better and more efficiently, and we're not wasting these non-renewable resources, right? So fossil fuels are considered non-renewable. It takes millions and millions and millions of years for the matter in Earth to be pressurized enough to become those things. So, and we're using them up faster than like Earth is creating them. So there are some people who say we need to be really careful. We want to make sure this lasts for as long as people last and not use everything up. So there are a lot of people who want to put more regulations in place saying we have to make cars more efficient. We have to make them utilize these fossil fuels better. Anyway, but like I was talking about the light bulbs, you can really see that there are a lot of things that are pretty inefficient when it comes to that energy transformation. So, and like a battery is like one of the least efficient ways to utilize energy, because imagine everything that went through to power up a battery. So it's kind of like bottom of the totem pole as far as energy conservation. All right, so this is the take-home message, but there's a couple videos here, so I'll go ahead and play this one. All right, I think that's super cute. Now we know how the dinosaurs disappeared. It was a big bowling ball, I guess, that knocked them all out. So I'm wondering if there's just a tiny bit of flaw in that where, he didn't necessarily explain that there was some energy, some of that lost in heat so that the ball, it didn't seem like it went all the way back to the exact spot, which would make sense, right? Because eventually the ball, if you keep it going back and forth, eventually it will stop because nothing's being put into the system. So would you do that? Would you stand there and trust me to send a bowling ball your way? You'd probably get extra credit. So that whole idea of energy not created or destroyed. But this other video I'm not going to show you right now, but I will tell you that Mr. Anderson is one of my favorite scientists on YouTube. He just speaks to me, in the pacing of his teaching, and just his explanations are so good. So if you ever need a concept clarified, search Bozeman Science, Mr. Anderson, whatever you're looking into, photosynthesis, etc. He's just so good. Entropy is that idea that everything is moving toward disorder. Okay, so if you have a very ordered molecule, like a glucose molecule and all the bonds that are there, if you just let the molecule sit over time, it's going to eventually decay or break up or denature, come apart, right? Because everything's moving toward disorder. So for another way to explain that is, here I go dark again, get a little morbid, but to stay alive, what do you have to do? You have to eat, you have to drink, right? So you are putting energy into the system. So you are helping molecules be formed and come apart. You're helping all that metabolism of your body. So you're helping the order of your body. If you stopped eating, don't try this. If you stopped eating and you just, went into starvation mode, what would eventually happen? Well, your body's you're going to die. And since there's no energy being put into the system, right, all the systems aren't functioning anymore, your body will decay. And those are those molecules coming apart and becoming less ordered, less complex. So in the universe, everything is kind of moving toward the less complex, less ordered, unless you put energy into a system. And that's what entropy, the whole idea of entropy is. So as time goes on, there's more disorder. The ATP molecule, adenosine triphosphate. So you know there's going to be 3 of something, because tri means 3. So when you look at this, you have this 3rd phosphate group, and sometimes it's depicted with a little wavy line instead of a straight line as far as the connection between it. And that kind of tells you that it's a very, that it wants to do something. It's very, I don't want to say, how do they say it? Well, you can look at it and say it's a high energy bond. So if it comes apart, it's going to give us a lot of energy. And when that breaks off and gives us that energy, then you have this adenosine diphosphate. So diphosphate. And di means 2. So that's how you know there's just 2 phosphates left. So really, and the whole system of energy is building and breaking down this molecule, right? Building it to store the energy, and then we utilize it, we break it down to release the energy. And we can, obviously you can see there's the sugar involved there, etc. You can kind of look at that for yourself. So yeah, that whole idea of one system drives the other system. You can kind of see this cyclical, right? It says here, ATP can be used and recycled thousands of times. So it's just that build up and breakdown, build up and breakdown. So just so you know, there's always energy that needs to be put into the system, but we get more out of the system as far as energy if some of it is put in. So, and like I mentioned before, it's not only giving us energy to run and walk, it's giving us the energy to build the muscle tissue, repair wounds, etc. Or like in a plant, to grow parts of the plant, roots, stem, whatever. There's your take-home message. When it goes through this metabolic process of photosynthesis, one of the end products, one of the, maybe even you could call it waste product, but one of the things it lets go of is oxygen, right? So when the molecules are all ordered and they start to come apart, oxygen is something that's let out. Well, lucky for us, that's what we need for our cellular respiration. It's one of the things, is that oxygen molecule. So plants aren't doing this because they're like, you know what? We like people. We want to let people live. We want to create oxygen for them. No, it's obviously, they have no clue. They could care less. They also use the oxygen molecules in their cellular respiration. So it's like this self-sustaining system they have going on. These are some of the other entities that can photosynthesize. There's even a particular bacteria, not all bacteria, that can photosynthesize. The big idea here is, we have these 2 main parts of photosynthesis. The photo part, so photo, it's going to have something to do with light, and the synthesis. And that synthesis means to come together, you synthesize something. So luckily in science, a lot of words, kind of can help us get clued into what's going to happen. 3 inputs, 2 products. And it's just like in math, the product is the end thing, right? Where does photosynthesis take place? So it, is the plant, but we're going to zoom in, look closer, and you can see that it gets in closer to the leaf. We're looking at the leaf here. And so think about that. Now think about all the different kinds of leaves that there are, right? Broadleaves are what these are called, or, deciduous trees, those, leaves of different sizes. So you have to, start to think about how different plants evolved in various ways, right, to do everything just a little differently than to survive in whatever environment they were evolving in. And so next time you take a walk in the forest, look at the different kinds of leaves, and maybe some make more sense of where they're located. Are they closer in sunshine? Are they in a very shaded area? So maybe they have to be really broad leaves to try to get in as much sunshine as they can when it's peeking through the forest. pine needles. Pine needles are specialized leaves, right? We don't really think of them as leaves, but they have to photosynthesize as well. And the idea that pine trees, conifers, they don't drop all their needles at once. We know they drop them because we see them on the ground, but we also know it's very different than like an oak tree, right? If you have an evergreen tree, it's going to lose or let go of those leaves in different ways, or those pines in different ways. So you start to think about all of that. So photosynthesis takes place in the chloroplast. So we're going to find out what chloroplasts are. So an organelle, so you should remember organelle. Remember, like the in our cells, like you have mitochondria and Golgi bodies. Those are all organelles. So this is a type of organelle that we don't have. We don't have chloroplasts. Here, when we're looking closer into that exact chloroplast, we're looking at what's called a thylakoid. So that's going to be where the photo part of photosynthesis takes place. Chlorophyll that is in the chloroplast is a molecule, and that's what's going to be able to chemically react with the light. But this here says stroma. So that's kind of like the in-between part. It says the location of synthesis reactions. So we'll look at that a little closer later, where the chemical energy from the photoreaction is used to synthesize sugars. So the photo part taking place in the thylakoid, the synthesis part taking place in the stroma. Light travels in these waves, and you probably have heard that. And if we think about waves, whether you're thinking about waves in an ocean or just what you know about waves, if they're shorter and closer together, that denotes like more energy, right? This like waves, like I kind of think of it like that. Whereas if it's like further apart, more distance between them, less energy. So it's called that frequency. So how frequent the waves are coming in. So let's see what it says here. So a type of kinetic energy made up of little energy packets called photons. That's what we get from the sun. So that's going to be our moving energy, right? Photons. So these photons are these waves, right? And so there's different types of waves that are coming from the sun, all from that sun, but different types. So wavelength corresponds to the amount of energy, as I was saying before. So there's this little part here of these various waves. So radio waves, infrared, UV, X-rays, gamma, and then this visible light. And though that's what we can see. And we can recognize the colors here, right? Colors of the rainbow. So let's look a little bit more into that. All of it is called the electromagnetic spectrum. And what we can see from these spectra, we can't see X-rays, we can't see radio waves like with, our naked eye. But we can see color, and then that's within that visible light. What something, not only plants, but what anything around us, what light is it absorbing? So what chemical structure in the paint, or the plastic or whatever it is, the color that they put into this red pen, what about that is absorbing particular colors and reflecting back to our eyes red, okay? Just like the plant. So when we're seeing green, it's what we have to understand, that the plant is absorbing other colors, but it's reflecting back this green. And that's all because of the chemical makeup and the chemical reaction. And chlorophyll is one of those types of pigments in a plant. Now we see plants, we don't just see green. You see flowers, you see all kinds of colors, So we're not just always talking about green. So chlorophyll, the main pigment molecule in plants that absorbs the light energy from the sun. The overall message that I want you to know is, like, there are different chlorophylls. There's chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, and then there's the carotenoids. And the combination of those in different amounts will reflect back colors in the different colors. So, and then it shows you what wavelengths each color is at, or each of these pigments is at. So seasonal differences. Once again, we're back with the broadleaves. So the green leaves, so it's reflecting when it has a lot of chlorophyll A and it has some chlorophyll B here. And yeah, it's just a little off here. It's weird. This kind of is a little bit not aligned. I may have moved it when I was moving things around. But anyway, this yellow bar here are the carotenoids. So it really depends on the amount. You see how the amount differs? So it's not just like if it has chlorophyll or not, will make it green or not. It's in what proportions does it have these. And you can look at any tree as it's changing color from green. First of all, you can see various shades of green in different trees. Not everything's the same green, right? So it's a different combination of these pigment chemicals. And then as you get into fall and winter, what happens is the chlorophyll molecules, they kind of retreat back into the branches to wait out the winter. And as those chlorophyll pigments are pulled into the branches, and then they can also be rearranged and used for different things, if to pull chemicals apart to be used for different things. But you pull those back, so now you don't have as much of the chlorophyll because it's being reserved for something else, as a evolutionary protective, hey, we need to do this because here comes winter, right? A lot less light in the winter. So it goes into a little bit of a dormant stage. And, I'd have to really look into that more as far as scientifically to explain more. But now you have what's reflecting off of the leaves. We see different colors because the pigments have changed. So the wavelengths, different wavelengths are now being absorbed because now the carotenoids are more dominant and absorbing more of those particular colors from the rays. So then you have more of the oranges and reds kind of reflecting back. This is something that we might try in class. I'll put that video up in case we don't get a chance, and you can do that on your own, but we'll see. So it's all about exciting the electrons, that energy that gets those electrons to be excited so they do something, right? So they want to spread their electricity. Just kind of like if you got exciting news and you want to tell everybody, that's kind of what this is like. So when that electron gets excited, so it could do one of two things. So it's going to transfer the energy to something that's nearby. And remember, every time you transfer energy, not quite as potent as the initial energy, or it can, transfer the energy and then get that rather than just staying in that other part, it actually excites another electron, and that electron also goes to a higher. It's kind of like if you're excited about the party, you go up to a friend and you tell them and they get excited too. That's like that first scenario. And this next scenario is, I guess, more like you're excited about the party and you just, you go from place to place all day and you just stay excited about the party. So rather than like you didn't tell anybody else yet. I don't know. Guess I really want to go to a party since we've been kind of stuck in the house for a while from COVID. All right. And then photosynthesis in more detail, just when you thought it couldn't get more detailed. So you hit the plant in the photo part of photosynthesis, right? And it hits those chloroplasts where, of course, the chlorophyll is inside. So you're exciting those electrons in there. And then it's going to be stored as an ATP molecule. So that's the adenosine triphosphate. So we're going to look more detail, but that energy created that ATP molecule. So now we have that we can depend on for later energy. And this NADPH. So, this is where you're like, oh, more acronyms. Ugh. But just, I want you to know that when you see NAD, NADPH, these types, know that it has something to do with carrying electrons. I kind of think of it as like a basket and it's carrying electrons. So either an electron is removed from it or it's added to it. So if you see a little plus sign next to something, we know that there's more positivity, so it must be more protons, so it must have lost an electron. So just kind of keep that in mind if you see a plus sign or don't see a plus sign when it comes to these additional acronyms. So we're going to look at the photoreaction. Then later we're going to look at the synthesis reaction. So the energy comes in from the sun. This is, look at the number 1 here, and gets those electrons excited. So we know that there's 2 fates for that electron. Either it excites another electron or it self-moves to another area. Then, so we see the excited state here. All of this is, when it says pigment, it's going to be a chlorophyll A, B, or the carotenoids. So it's going to take this and it can move this electron to what's called the electron transport chain. Now, we're going to have to know this for cellular respiration as well. The electron transport chain, so this other step, is really where you harvest a lot of energy. So it's really important. So it's going to move that excited electron. It'd be like I was like, go tell everybody about the party, and you move on and go tell everybody about the party. Number 3 here, as you can see here, you have water coming into the system. Remember, plants need water. So you have a molecule that has hydrogen and oxygen, right? H2O. So you could think of it more like that, like the plant needs H2O. It really needs the H, right? It needs the protons of this water. So that's a way it gets it. So this water comes in, and it doesn't need the O at this point, right? In photosynthesis, it needs the H. So it's going to split the water. So through metabolism, through a chemical process, it splits that water. Now you have H's and O's separate. So when it splits, so then here, okay, so oxygen, the O leaves, right? And it's released as oxygen into the air, right? That's what we know. Plants give off oxygen. So there's where it happens. But this part here, so now it takes this hydrogen molecule, and it, remember, hydrogen has 1 proton. Remember, it's the first on the periodic table, and 1 electron. So here you have the electrons sent in, right? They can do their thing as far as helping with energy. And then you have these protons, and we know they're the protons because they have the little plus sign. And we know that's the electron because it has a little or it's E, but it also has a little negative sign. So that's the energy created there, or energy that it has, the positive or negative. So a hydrogen ion. This is going to be important. These protons are going to be important. This is the thylakoid. Remember the thylakoid stack within the chloroplast. It's happening right here. This is where we are, right here on like that edge. The electron gets shot off to that electron transport chain, which is a little further down. Remember, we were here. I don't know if my pointer's going to show up. Sometimes it does or doesn't. Now we're here, okay? And these electrons, remember, follow the electrons when you're following the whole process. And as the electron moves, you see in the picture, it's depicted as like the electron moving down. But also that gives us a sense of every time, the electron has energy, but as it moves on, it is not as efficient as in the beginning. Remember that moving toward entropy, or that idea of every time, the energy just kind of gets lost a little bit along the way. So you have this higher, excited, more energy because it got that energy from the sun, but as it goes on, it does work. So it has the capacity to do work. And as it's doing work, every time it does some work, it loses a little bit of energy. Okay, so here you have that thylakoid membrane, right, the thylakoid. And you should recognize here that that's a bilayer, lipid bilayer. Remember the phospholipids? Here they are. That's that membrane. So we have the hydrophilic heads and the hydrophobic tails there. We can see that aligned. And the electron passing through. So we have number 1, electrons move through the electron transport chain, releasing energy, okay, falling to a lower state. Number 2, the released energy powers proton pumps. So here it's doing some work. So it's causing these protons to move against their concentration gradient. Now, the concentration gradient, remember we talked about that when there's things will want to naturally move toward where there's less of something. So we talked about, like, if everybody squished in an elevator, as soon as you open the elevator door, everybody just kind of disperses out. So if there's a lot of protons on one side, it doesn't naturally want to be, it wants to naturally go to the other side to get away from the other protons, right? It's not like people, you just want to like your space. So this pump, it uses the energy to push. It would almost be like if I'm using energy to push everybody into the elevator, okay? So I'm this proton pump, and I ate a good breakfast, so I have my energy, right? So it's like that electron energy, and I'm pushing everybody into the elevator. So against their will, against their wanting to do it. So that's what this does. It powers it to pump it to the other side. This is important because it's going to be the reverse pumping for cellular respiration. It's pumping it to the other side. Then what happens, so that's that part. So you have all these protons being pumped over here, right? And now they all want to get to the other side. They all want to get out of there. They're like, I want to go to the other side where there's not as many protons. So what this pump does is ATP synthase area, it allows that to happen. So it allows all those protons to flood through it. And as these protons are moving through, it creates enough energy to take this ADP, adenosine diphosphate, so there's 2 phosphates on that molecule, and it attaches a third. Okay, so it uses that energy to attach another phosphate to it. It creates that molecule here, but also you can see here it creates this to NADPH. We know that that's carrying an electron. Okay, so it's going to go on to do more work. We see that something else is going to happen after this because an electron is moving on, but we also see that, hey, this is pretty cool. Some ATP was created. Now we have this stored energy in this molecule that can be used later as well. That is the photo part of photosynthesis. Yes, that's only part of it. That's the photo part. We still have to get to the synthesis part. But we saw how the sun was used, right? We saw how water was used and how the electrons moved, and it created these molecules that we can use for other things. That's your take-home message. You might want to read this. All right, on to the synthesis part of photosynthesis. So you're good. Basically, we're building a sugar molecule, a glucose molecule, or various other sugar molecules. Okay, so now we are in the Calvin cycle steps. Okay, so within this portion of the synthesis reaction of photosynthesis, we have to utilize carbon from the atmosphere. So that's why we know plants take in carbon dioxide. So that's a good thing. So it's called fixation. So there's this enzyme. Now we know that enzymes typically are a type of protein. So we're kind of remembering our vocab here. And we also have learned, though, that usually enzymes end in ase, like sucrase, lactase. But here we have an enzyme called ribisco. And so we're not going to panic, though. We're not going to panic. We just know because it tells us it's an enzyme. So we know that it's going to help do something, either put something together or break something apart, right? So we have this ribisco that helps grab some carbon dioxide molecules, and it attaches it to an organic molecule, making this bigger molecule, okay? So it's going to synthesize it or piece it together to create something called G3P, okay? That's this first part. Now we can see here, we know what ATP and ADP are, so we know that there was some energy used because we have ATP and now we have ADP, so we must have popped off that phosphate and used some energy there from that reaction. Here we go along and we see more of this, and I told you not to panic about these acronyms. We see something happening here, correct? And now we have this little plus sign, so we know, oh, I remember just like a second ago, Miss D was talking about if we see a plus sign, we must have lost an electron because we have more positivity now in this molecule. Okay, so we know that perhaps there was some energy used there as well. So that's where the sugar is created. The organic molecule is modified into a small sugar called G3P. So it used the energy from ATP and the energy from NADPH, so that electron, that excitement about the electron. Some molecules are combined to form a bigger. So if you take this smaller molecule of G3P and you add to it, this is the part where you actually made a sugar molecule. So, you know, we like to mostly like glucose, but there are other sugars that that can be created here in this cycle. So yeah, now we have that six-sided molecule of sugar. However, that's not the end of the story. So we have to keep this process going on. It's going to turn another time. So regeneration. So some of the G3P, some of that molecule will go on to drive the process again and using that energy. And once again, we see some energy being used here. So it's cyclical, right? You have to use some energy to create energy, but when we create that sugar molecule, that's going to allow us, now you have that bigger molecule, that's stored energy for something later. That's the Calvin cycle. Like I said, you might want to stop there, reread that. This here, and it was in the book, and it talked about, now that, you know, scientists know so much about plants and how they function, you know, is there a way to design plants, to help genetically design plants, or even know where plants grow best? If we can start there, you know, maybe we don't grow a plant that really needs to take in a lot of water, right? Everything is a little different depending on how it adapted over time, how it evolved over time. So maybe you don't plant, you know, a cotton field in a place where you can, you know, where desertification, where something is turned into a desert, where that's more likely to happen. And that's happened. I'll have to look that up, where the area that I'm talking about, that's kind of well known. But not only being smart about where we plant things, but also being smart about when we look at genetically modifying something, and we'll talk about that as well. And there's some definite debate around genetically modified foods. And, you know, to what degree do we want to alter the genes so it can withstand? So let's say I have a plant that, or an entity, an organism that can withstand lack of water. You know, maybe I can put that gene inside of a plant that I want to grow somewhere that's very dry but doesn't usually do well there. Well, maybe I can kind of mix the two as far as gene-wise, put a code, right? Remember I talked about our DNA is kind of like the cookbook, right? It tells us all the recipes. Well, maybe I'm adding in a recipe in that code, so if it gets too dry, then that plant would be able to take that recipe for whatever protein that was or whatever adaptation that was for dry and hot, and make that in this plant. So genetically modifying, there's a lot of good things that have happened, like insulin and things like that, so many good things. But there's also the other side where, you know, when we create something that can actually spread in the world, like, you know, if you have seeds that drift, there lies the problem of genetically modifying plants, right? Can we keep the purity of non-genetically modified plants if we have plants around it that can spread seed? So this is the stomata that are on the leaves and, well, various places on a plant, but particularly the leaves. And it's just a really cool thing where they open up to release, you know, oxygen or take in carbon dioxide. You can see the open close. To me, it looks like a little mouth. I think it's kind of cute. So there are different kinds of plants, right? Different kinds of adaptations. Most plants are this C3, meaning they do photosynthesis in a particular way. And it says here about 95% of plant species have this particular adaptation. It's very energy efficient. It's kind of what we saw when we went through that Calvin cycle. But there can be a lot of water loss in hotter climates. because of those stomatas being so open. So if you have this open, you know, water vapor as well can be released, and you lose a lot of water that way, but it's maximum taking in carbon dioxide. So then you have C4 plants, C4 photosynthesis, and that is when the stomata doesn't open quite as much, so it's going to be more protective in various climates that, you know, that are more advantageous for these particular plant types. Some crops like corn are these type of plants. So it says the carbon uptake requires additional energy because it kind of stores it. There's more of storage involved, I believe, in those particular plants. But the stomata isn't like wide open, so there's not as much water loss. Great, but it does take more energy to do this. And then you have CAM photosynthesis, and that's when the stomata stays closed primarily during the day to not let a lot of water vapor out during the day because it doesn't want to lose it. It's in such hot areas like the desert, doesn't want to lose that water. So it will photosynthesize at night. Well, the sun isn't there at night. So what it has to do is it has to, you know, take in, you know, absorb those photons, but then hold on to it until nighttime when it can take in the carbon dioxide that it needs. So then the stomata opens up at night. So basically, overall, this is just showing us that there's various adaptations through time and evolutionary pressures around it. And the plants that were able to do this were able to live longer, so they would outcompete other plants that don't have this system in these areas like the desert. You can stop here and look at this map if you want, where the C3 and C4 plants can be found. And there's your summary. All right, so I'm going to stop there. This is probably super long as it is, but that is basically the intro and photosynthesis, and then I'll do one on cellular respiration.